Dog Nation's postseason coverage, Go for 2 in 22, is made possible by our partners, including Kroger. Visit Kroger for all your holiday needs and to stock up for bowl season. R.S. Andrews, Dog Nation's choice for all your heating and air needs. Visit rsandrews.com to see how they can make you smile today. Marlowe's Tavern. Need a tasty gift this holiday season? Try a Marlowe's Tavern gift card. Visit marlowestavern.com. Georgia Farm Bureau. With local agents all across the state of Georgia, Georgia Farm Bureau is the home team. Find your agent today at gfbinsurance.com. Discover Dunwoody. Stay at one of our 9 hotels and enjoy easy access to 2 MARTA stations, which is just a short ride to downtown. Visit discoverdunwoody.com/dognation to book your stay today. Royal Caribbean. Reserve your cabin on the 2nd annual cruise with Dog Nation in April. Visit royaldogs.com to reserve your cabin today. The Wilson PC Personal Injury Attorneys. Because Atlanta happens from out of nowhere. When the unexpected happens to you, visit atlantahappens.com. The 7-6 Apparel Company. The perfect holiday gifts for the hard-to-find person in your family. Visit the76.com to start shopping today. And Berkshire Hathaway Home Services of Georgia. The best time for new beginnings is now. Forever moving you. Visit bhhsgeorgia.com to start your search today. And here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brandon Adams. Welcome into the Marlowe's Tavern in Brookhaven tonight for this Go for 22. Go for 2 and 20. I've said this all
on your shirt.
You
might win 22 before it's over with.
I can just read this off the shirt. Go for 2 and 22 special as the Georgia Bulldogs get ready to get it all started on Saturday with the SEC Championship. Happy to be joined by the entire Dog Nation team this evening. Mike Griffith, Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel, and over the course of the next few minutes, we're going to talk about all that stands in front of Georgia, both this Saturday against the Tigers in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the chance to be back at Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the College Football Playoff, and then the chance to truly bring home another national championship in true Go for 2 in 22 style. And gentlemen, this week on Dog Nation Daily, I've had a number of guests on, and I've asked them all the same question. John Stinchcomb, who won an SEC title in 2002. Jake Fromm, who won an SEC championship in 2017. Today we had Sean Bailey on, who was a part of the 2005 SEC championship. And I asked them all this question. What does it mean to win an SEC title? This is something that Georgia has not done since 2017. This is something that the program did twice, prior to that under Mark Richt. And yet we live in a day and age now when it's about the college football playoff and it's about winning a national championship. But someone like me who grew up around the SEC, who was sort of bred to believe that the SEC was the best brand of football of all, no matter what you get to when it comes to college football playoff, I still think an SEC championship really, really matters. So, Mike, I'm going to begin with you. What do you think an SEC championship and that feat alone for now, what do you think that means for Georgia on Saturday?
Well, I think it means a lot. Kirby Smart said it's checking a box. Georgia's become a annual national championship contender, and if you believe the narrative, and I do, Georgia has replaced Alabama as the SEC standard. This has become an expectation for the Georgia Bulldogs. That was a little bit of the hole on the resume. That's been a driving force for this football team after losing 15 guys in the NFL draft, 13 transfers, and 4 assistant coaches. They have a chance to one-up arguably the greatest Georgia football program of all time. So this year in particular, I think it's huge. I think it's been a motivation. And I think, Connor, that it's become an expectation for Georgia football to win SEC championships.
Yeah, I think in talking to players from this team, it gives them an opportunity to separate themselves from last year's team because last year, yes, was a more naturally talented team, but it says something about this group of individuals where every week they've gone out and they've answered the bell. They've played one-score game this season. Alabama, by comparison, has played 5. And so it says something that Georgia, while sure, there aren't as many naturally gifted players on this team as there were a year ago, it says something that Georgia's able week in, week out to play better than the team opposite them. And I expect that to be the case once again on Saturday against a very physical LSU team.
But Connor, let me ask you, you're the youngest person on this panel right now. Is it old-fashioned to still think the SEC championship matters something in the playoff age? Because in a roundabout way, it's actually possible that none of the conference championship winners make the playoff. It's at least, it's not likely to happen, but it's at least possible. Is it old-fashioned to still view the SEC championship as a big deal in this playoff age?
No, I don't think it's old-fashioned. I just think this year, because of the fact that it is a 9-3 LSU team that isn't a behemoth. Again, Georgia's a 17.5-point favorite in this game. And years past, Georgia's gone and seen 2019 LSU, 2018 Alabama, teams that both played for a national title. Obviously, Alabama beats them in this game a season ago. When Georgia's been here in the past, it's usually been a pretty epic tilt with an all-time team on the other sideline here. That's not the case with LSU this year. And, I do think this week has felt a little smaller because of the fact that, one, it's not Alabama on the other side, two, that it just isn't some elite team that is capable, I think, of beating Georgia, going toe-to-toe and coming out better. I don't think that's the reality with LSU this Saturday.
Jeff, what does an SEC championship mean from your perspective?
So I think it's a matter, at a heart, a journalist is like a curator, a little bit of history, the matter of record. And really, this Georgia team, it's not a matter of what you're capable of, it's what you did. So if this team goes wire to wire, wins the SEC, wins the national championship, I think the numbers, I'm pretty close to it. I think Connor wrote it this week. Last year's team beat teams by an average of 41-9, 41-10. I think this year it's 38-11, something like that. Look how close they are to what last year was on paper, on the field. And yet they could go, and listen, these boys all talk to each other. They can go, yeah, you won the national championship, and you broke the drought, but we didn't lose, and we won an SEC. Like, none of those boys last year that went off the NFL have an SEC ring. And I think that matters to this team in an era where we were talking about this earlier. There's no Ohio State looming. There's no Alabama looming, probably.
Yet.
I think it takes a little bit out of the air out of the quest, just a little bit, where the biggest player on the stage now, kind of what Mike says, it is the Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah.
And it's more like what can Georgia defy? What can Georgia do? I mean, folks, this is what a message is going to be in a lot of things with Georgia. This might be the best run ever for the Dogs ever. I was telling somebody, a group of people here before we went live, you guys know that the 43-4-1 used to be the greatest era of Georgia history. Folks, Vince Dooley won 200 career games. 43 of them came in those 4 years.
Amazing.
201.
201.
Don't want to shortchange the
Well,
man.
sometimes they don't count the bowl games, right? But I will stand noted on that. But now this team, this year's seniors, Brandon, they're already 46-5, and that was that 2020 aberration year.
Yep.
Only 3 home games. All those SEC games, only 9 games. Thank you, Vanderbilt. And they've still done all this. I mean, it really is a precipice, a march to history.
Mike, we're only 5 minutes in this broadcast. We've already gotten the word precipice from Jeff. He's curating history. I mean, I'm telling you right now, we are in the presence of greatness here. He's on his way to pitching a shutout. We're just barely 5 minutes into the show.
Yeah, I feel like I'm listening to Greg Sankey at the SEC Media. Got to get out my dictionary every other paragraph from the commissioner.
Erudite.
But in all seriousness, Mike, one of the things I've said a little bit this week is I'm curious to see what happens on Saturday. Obviously, if this game goes the way that Georgia fans want it to, I do think this team's going to celebrate this. And I think in the last few years, I'm not even sure Georgia has known when it was they clinched the East. They don't celebrate winning the East very much anymore. But I do believe they'll celebrate winning the SEC championship. And it won't be about punching a ticket for the playoff. That's still a month away. I think this team's going to give you a pretty big celebration on that field on Saturday night. Confetti's going to fall. They'll have some fun with that. I think that'll be a little bit of an indication of how much this means to this team.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. It's like Kirby said, it's too hard to win not to take the time to celebrate. You know, you think about the pressure and the expectations that we put on Georgia. Like we've said, they're supposed to win. And not just supposed to win, but they're supposed to win impressively. We put them under the microscope with the completion percentages or average yards per rush or touchdown percentage in the red zone. And the reality is they're 18 to 22-year-old kids working together trying to accomplish something. And, you know, Kenny McIntosh said after the last game, Georgia hasn't forgotten 2019. And I know a lot of you haven't forgotten it either. When LSU really handed it to Georgia down there in the SEC championship game. And this is a shot at redemption because we've been hearing a lot of garbage from LSU for the last 3 years. and it's going to be payback for Georgia against LSU Saturday.
Well, my payback for LSU is not even so much about 2019, although that'd be nice. But you got Brian Kelly coming down here doing the fake accent thing. Like, how dumb does he think Southerners are that he can do family and think those people are going to fall for that? I want to beat up LSU for that reason as much as anything else. Connor, you know what I'm talking about.
I mean, I think Brian Kelly's a good coach. He's just trying to, reach his new people. South Bend, Indiana, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana could not be more different places. You got to try and reach your community however you go about doing it. So,
what do you think?
It's clearly worked. I mean, he got Harold Perkins last year as a recruit, and there might not be a better freshman in the country than
I thought
Harold
it was
Perkins.
the dancing, Connor. I thought it was the dancing that he did on the Twitter. Jeff, what about that? When these guys dance, and does that really work with these recruits when they're doing it? What was that?
The biggest thing about Harold Perkins, since you brought him up, is like, how in the world did A&M not match the bid that needed to get that guy?
They got every recruit in the world. They spent $2 billion to get him, and then the one guy they didn't get's the only guy anybody's talking about.
That's not the guy you need to clip coupons for, or like save oil well money for.
It's amazing. Hey, by the way, speaking of saving money this time of year, our friends at Marlowe's Tavern giving you a great opportunity to do that. You got a lot of folks that you're trying to buy for on this Christmas season, and Marlowe's Tavern's making that very easy right now, and there's a lot of incentives coming your way for doing that. You've heard me say this to you for years, and once again, it's time to do that here again in 2022 there as well. It's the bottle of Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine. So when you stop by your local Marlowe's Tavern, or when you go to marlowestavern.com, you can purchase a $50 gift card, which is a great way to that hard-to-buy person, that person that's difficult to please. I can promise you this, they love chef-inspired food, they love craft cocktails, they love the things that you get right here at Marlowe's Tavern. And as a special thank you to you for getting that gift card, they're going to get you the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine. So pop the top and celebrate on New Year's Eve or after Georgia beats LSU on Saturday. Enjoy it with your family, and then whatever you want to do with that, the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine goes great with it. But listen to this. When you get the $100 Marlowe's Tavern gift card, not only do you get the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine, but you also get a bonus $20 gift card there as well. So you can enjoy that. And as one of our folks said, you can dance with Brian Kelly. Maybe that will come with that there as well. So it's a lot of fun. Marlowe's one of our great sponsors for Go for 2 and 22. We're able to do some really fun things this time of year, and a great collection of sponsors, including our friends at Marlowe's Tavern, make all that possible. Connor, I'm going to put you in the position of playing heel here for a moment. Obviously, Georgia's a very big favorite against LSU on Saturday, and frankly, more than just Georgia fans think UGA should do well in this spot. If it goes wrong, why will that be the case against the Tigers? Even if it's a much closer game than it's supposed to be. What goes wrong to get it there?
Harold Perkins is the best player in the field. And Harold Perkins is not the only very talented defender they have in that front seven. B.J. Ojolari is a very good player. Ali Gay is a great player. I know Mason Smith is a name Georgia fans know from the recruiting trail. If this front seven had him, I think they'd be a lot better than what they are. There's still some nice talent on this LSU team, but I think if LSU is going to win, it's going to be a low-scoring game where Harold Perkins is able to force a turnover or two, like we saw him do against Arkansas. I think that's the blueprint that LSU would have to follow to keep this game close.
Jeff, you know who's finally playing a little bit better for them, too, is John Emery Jr., running back. That's the name that you and I talked about in a lot of our interviews on Dog Nation Daily a lot. Finally, Emery's sort of starting to look a little bit like the guy that we spent, at least I certainly spent weeks and weeks and weeks asking about back when he was a recruit.
Yeah, it's funny. You look at it, the 2019 class, LSU signed 3 5-stars. He's the only one left. They only have 1 5-star left in the 2020 class. People forget the 2020 class. You know who was the highest ranked recruit for LSU in their 2020 class?
Remind me.
Gilbert.
How about that? That's right. Wow.
And
Boy, that's a long time ago.
This is like I said earlier, the transfers that LSU is rebuilt with, it's really an attrition type LSU team. You look at their top 100 recruits, the 2019, the 2020, the 2021, the bulk of the guys that should win that game, they're really not contributing. The transfers they brought in have contributed. I think Mason Smith is a really good point. But I saw a stat this week. This is one of those weeks where the reporter in you looks everything. And LSU's top 2 defensive tackles, I don't know if you guys saw this, they both have over like 600 snaps this year, almost 700 snaps. That's Roy and then another guy. You know, Kirby has never had a defensive lineman get more than 500 snaps in any season. It's just a program, and the way Georgia does things a little bit different than LSU. I liked your question to Connor. I think the one wild card would be if Jaden Daniels is playing a little bit of possum right now, and maybe he's a lot healthier than he is. Again, That's that mobile quarterback. Maybe Keyshawn Butte, one of their other 5 stars, has an awakening on Saturday. Those are the threat levels I see for LSU.
So, Mike, let's talk about Jaden Daniels for a moment, because here's the rule I typically operate on. If you think a player's healthy, there's a chance he might be hurt. If you think a player's hurt, he probably is. Is it possible that Daniels is healthier than he's letting on? Because that's not typically, in my mind, the way this stuff goes. A guy that you think is hurt generally probably is.
Yeah, you know, for those of you that were watching, he went down with that injury with 6:21 left at A&M. They were going on a 2-point conversion, and he came back into the game, but his ankle was heavily taped. And when we talked with Brian Kelly on Sunday, they put him in a protective boot. I called one of my buddies down there, Glenn Gilbo. He works for Outkick, covered LSU for years, and he tells me that he's not 100%, but he is going to play. I think that's a death blow, Brandon. I think one of the keys to beating Georgia is a mobile quarterback and a guy that can get the ball downfield. I don't think Jaden Daniels offers either one of those things Saturday.
So, Connor, we heard, I think it was Zion Logue this week, say that Georgia was exclusively practicing for Jaden Daniels. Is he sandbagging, or is that really the way you think Georgia's approaching this?
I mean, yes, in the sense that, they know that Jaden Daniels is a mobile quarterback. They know he's also capable of making throws from time to time as well there. But the reality is they can't focus too much in on one person or one other guy, whether that be Garrett Nussmeier, their backup, sort of a nameless, faceless opponent. And they're going to have to go out there. They're going to have to play contain, try and keep whoever that opposing quarterback is in the pocket, just because it's harder to beat teams like Georgia from the pocket. And so I think the game plan doesn't really change all that much regardless of whether Jaden Daniels is out there or not.
Yeah, because if he's completely healthy, though, this is the most, I'm trying to go back through the annals of my mind, this is the most mobile quarterback that Georgia's played since when? I mean, he's a very...
Zion Logue threw out Robbie Ashford, which I think is a very good comparison.
Okay.
Now Daniels is, I think, a much better thrower than Ashford is, but from an athleticism standpoint, I would say Ashford is a fair comparison.
Because I do think of Jaden, I don't think that Daniels has ever proven to be quite the prospect he looked like when he's a true freshman way back at Arizona State, but I do think he is a top-shelf athlete, the kind of guy that you have to pay. If he's fully healthy, you have to give Daniels a good bit of respect. I don't think he's a polished thrower, Mike. I think you said that before, but I do think he's a terrific athlete.
Well, and beyond that, he's a leader, and he's a big game player. His freshman year, Brandon alluded to this, they knocked off Oregon and derailed Oregon, knocked them out of the playoff essentially when he was a true freshman at Arizona State. Justin Herbert was the quarterback at Oregon. So this is a big game player. But at the same time, if he lacks the mobility, he's still going to have some really fast Georgia defensive linemen and linebackers coming after him. And, going into last week's game, Jaden Daniels was the leading rusher among all the quarterbacks in the nation. That's just how mobile he was. But beyond that, and the difference between him and the Auburn quarterback was that Jaden Daniels didn't make the same number of mistakes. He was smart when he went downfield. I think LSU's receiving core has been a disappointment. I don't think they have the weapons. I think they would really need to put the offense on his back, Brandon. And I'm just not sure at less than 100% that he's going to be up to that task.
We're live here tonight, Marlowe's Tavern in Brookhaven. It's our Go for 2 and 22 kickoff event, getting things started in style. SEC Championship coming up on Saturday. College football playoff, we believe, for Georgia coming up after that. So let's talk a little bit about playoff scenarios. Now, in a roundabout way, this could all be done on Friday night. If USC wins on Friday night, there is a line of thought out there that the playoff is set because Georgia and Michigan certainly seem to have playoff spots locked up. Typically speaking, I think that TCU is the kind of team that the playoff committee typically likes to exclude. But I sort of get the impression this year, Connor and I talked about this on video last night, I sort of get the impression this year there's a little bit more of an appetite to include a team like that into the playoff. I think they have a very strong case to still make the playoff, even if they were to lose to Kansas State on Saturday. But I guess, Connor, I'll work with you and we'll go around the room here. Give me the scenarios that can play out, and I guess give me sort of what you do think plays out with the playoff stuff for Friday.
Yeah, so obviously the most interesting game is USC-Utah on Friday. USC is a 3-point favorite in that game. They have already lost to Utah, but the game was at Utah. And Utah needed a 2-point conversion in the final minute to win that game. And USC beat UCLA on the road, although I don't know how much of a road game that was since there aren't a lot of fans there at Pasadena. Then they beat Notre Dame at home last week. This is a team playing their best football of the year right now, but this is a Utah team. You don't blow them out, and this is a Utah team that last year was in this scenario where they're playing an Oregon team, and they beat Oregon earlier in the season, and they went out there and they tooled them up once again. So I think that's the most interesting game this weekend. TCU and Kansas State play on Saturday. Kansas State was up 28-10 when they played earlier this year. Had some quarterback issues. They've since figured that out, playing really well right now, number 10 team in the country. There's a world where both those teams lose. And I should point out here, I think TCU should be in the college football playoff. If their name is Texas or Oklahoma, we're not having this discussion about them with the resume that they have. But if TCU loses and USC lose, I think the door is maybe open. I don't think they're going to follow through and do this. But Ohio State and Alabama both slide up over those two teams.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting scenario. We should point out that both TCU and USC only about a field goal favorite here, so it's by no means a given that either or both these teams will win this weekend. Jeff, for you, how do you see it playing out?
So first of all, I love interactive panelist stuff right here. So let's say they both lose. Both TCU and USC loses. Which one between Ryan Day and Nick Saban is the first interview on College Game Day at 9 a.m.?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's Saban.
Who's
it's
that
Saban.
one?
Saban and Van Pelt are tight, and it'll be Saban.
I mean, literally, he's gonna be on Van Pelt that night, and then Ryan Day will probably get honors on the tee as well. But secretly, you think this playoff committee wants the anarchy? You think they want TCU out, USC out, you want Ohio State and Alabama back in?
I think in previous years, they wanted the very biggest brands they could get in. But to be honest with you, some of the years they got those matchups, the actual TV ratings weren't that great. So I think they've kind of decided that, you talk about the word anarchy, I think they're a little bit afraid of what other mid-level programs are going to think and say. If they see a team like TCU, 12-0 coming into conference championship Saturday, keep in mind, back in 2014, they were excluded from the playoff because they didn't have a 13th game. Back then, the Big 12 didn't have a title game. And all of a sudden now they stand to have the kind of like ironic outcome of missing the playoff because they lost a 13th game. That's the kind of thing that a lot of power brokers, I think, would really complain about. Obviously, Alabama and Ohio State are bigger brands. And to be honest with you, I think the Buckeyes and the Crimson Tide are both better teams. But I do believe in the discussion of most deserving, which is ultimately what the playoff debate seems to always come down to, I do believe that TCU is the most deserving.
So you want to talk about consternation and mental gymnastics? I think it's more intriguing if TCU stays in with a loss, and then the committee has to figure out Bama or Ohio State, because that's going to be World War VII between those two fan bases.
So, Mike, I want to bring you back in on this. I really don't think that's a tough decision for this committee to make at all. I think consistently over the course of years, the one thing they always do, especially at the end, they simply count losses. They are not putting a team like Alabama ahead of a team like Ohio State, with Alabama having more losses. I believe that Alabama's probably a better team than Ohio State. I think the committee will simply look at the loss column and reward the Buckeyes for having one fewer loss.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, Brandon, but I will point out that there is a precedent for the committee changing rankings of teams even while neither team played. I was covering Michigan State in 2014, and Michigan State was ranked ahead of Mississippi State, and we were all ready for Michigan State to go to the Orange Bowl, and they flipped those teams in the standings the final week, even though neither one of them played. Now, would they do that with the top four teams? I don't know. I think they did that because they wanted a more favorable bowl matchup. They wanted to send Mississippi State to the Orange Bowl. So there is a precedent for that happening. My conspiracy theory, and we all have them, is that this committee will bend over backwards to match Michigan and USC. I think they really want that Rose Bowl setting out there at the Fiesta Bowl, or even in Atlanta. You know, you heard some speculation that maybe Michigan would jump Georgia, which I thought was preposterous, and yet Heather Dinich, who does a great job with this, she covers the college football playoffs exclusively. You know, she didn't just make that up. Somebody told her that, and they probably did that to float that concept. So whether they jump USC over TCU or whether they jump Michigan over Georgia, see, I do think that style points are involved. If Michigan were to beat Purdue by 35 points and Georgia were to only win by 3,
right,
I think there's a scenario where Georgia could still get shipped out west, and I know Kirby really doesn't want that.
But let's go back to something you and I talked about today, that on Dog Nation Daily, if the committee had any inkling towards doing that, they could have set themselves up for that by ranking Purdue. And they didn't rank Purdue in this most recent ranking. And Purdue's not in the AP Top 25 either, but they won the West. They won, I think, 3 straight to conclude the season.
Yep.
I mean, it would not be the most egregious, and they ranked NC State a couple of weeks ago. It would not be that egregious if they wanted to rank Purdue in this poll, and they didn't do it. So to me, And you're right. They can do whatever they want to, and they'll just make up their reason why. But if they were really contemplating moving Michigan past Georgia after the fact, after conference championship Saturday, to me, the way you grease the wheels for that is by ranking Purdue, and they didn't do that.
Well, now, wouldn't you guys think if we were at Marlowe's and we said the word Boilermaker, we'd be ordering a drink, by the way?
Right,
I can't even believe that we're talking about Purdue football here.
I mean, you got Brandon talking about old-fashioned the whole time while he's holding the bottle of sparkling brewed champagne. I think he wants to make friends with the bartender tonight.
I'm going to be like Diddy back in the 90s. I'm just going to pop the top on this, drink it straight out of the bottle. Connor, you wanted to jump in on the Purdue thing, though.
What's the best scenario for Georgia in terms of who they want to see in that 4 spot?
I think the easiest game for Georgia is undoubtedly USC. I think that USC does not play enough defense to challenge Georgia.
Yep.
I think we've seen actually a little bit more defense from TCU as of late. They played pretty good defense against Texas, for instance. I don't know that
Played
USC
great defense against Texas.
Yeah,
Didn't give up an
I don't know
offensive touchdown.
Yeah, I don't know that USC has a defensive performance that comes close. I guess maybe the Oregon State game, maybe, but I don't know that they have a defensive performance that comes close to matching that. I think the absolute most favorable matchup for Georgia is against USC, which is ironically also the kind of the most prestigious team they could likely play. But I think it's the best matchup overall, too. Anybody else?
Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'd like to see him play Ohio State. I heard so much about Ohio State last year. I would like to see Ohio State get in and Kirby have an opportunity to play Ohio State. I think Georgia would be fired up for that, and I think they would blow Ohio State off the field because I don't think Ohio State is nearly as explosive at wide receiver. I think their defense is terrible, and that would be the matchup that I think would be the most favorable for Georgia.
One thing I would say about Ohio State, there are a lot of key personnel, their best personnel guys, Travion Henderson, Jackson Smith. I mean, those guys would be healthier for that game, which would put a little bit more sting into what C.J. Stroud tries to do. But for me, I think C.J. Stroud's a little overcooked, maybe like the same way Will Levis was at Kentucky. I mean, it's kind of well documented that guy get in his kitchen and he becomes a much lesser college quarterback.
And I don't think there's any doubt. I actually kind of touched on this when I wrote Gimme 5 the other day, that there's two things you might seek out here if you're a Georgia fan. On the one hand, you might seek out the easiest possible path. On the other hand, you seek out, hey, what's the biggest possible game that Georgia could play in? I don't think there's any doubt. Georgia versus Ohio State is the biggest possible game that could take place in this postseason, both from a Georgia perspective, but also I think kind of a national perspective too. It's sort of weird these two teams haven't played since 1992. And if you want the absolute biggest possible game, the old wrestling line of a main event anywhere in the country, if you want the biggest possible game, there's no doubt that it's Georgia versus Ohio State.
Was Herbstreit the quarterback in that 92 game?
He sure was.
Be an interesting college game to set between Pollock and Herbstreit there. And,
yeah.
You know, we're not probably going to get that game in a national championship setting, but I think to get that game in the Peach Bowl, I think that would excite a lot of Georgia fans in that scenario.
No, I think that's exactly right. So I'll also say this about USC, Mike. I made the case a moment ago for why TCU, I believe, could still be in, maybe should still be in with a win. I don't feel that way about USC. I think that USC needs the conference championship. You know, TCU has to play the conference championship. They feel like they've done enough. This is a burden on them. Whereas I think for USC, their presence in the Pac-12 conference championship game should really be viewed as an opportunity. I don't believe that USC right now has a playoff resume. I believe they're working on that. The last, 2 weeks of wins have certainly helped them with that. You add the win against Utah, avenging their earlier loss. At that point in time, they're probably playoff worthy. They're certainly a conference champion, which becomes a data point for them too. But I actually think USC needs another win to truly round off what I sort of think of as a playoff resume.
I'm just glad we're not talking about what Tennessee needs to get in the college football playoff, because I heard so much about that the last 3 weeks of the season. And how about Clemson? How bad did Clemson blow it losing to South Carolina? Clemson could be in the on-deck circle, right? I mean, some SEC power. Even Kirby Smart, Connor, sounded off when I threw him that question. I didn't know where he'd go with it. Kirby even had a little bit of fun with South Carolina beating Clemson.
I mean, it speaks to what Georgia has done this season. We're a Clemson team that took out Tennessee, a playoff contender, took out Clemson, a playoff contender. Georgia beat them 48-7, and it wasn't even that close. You know, they had to score a late touchdown to fire off some fireworks. And against Tennessee, they literally ran out of fireworks to shoot off there. And so bringing it back to Georgia here a little bit, again, they're the best team in the country. They've, I think, shown that over the course of the year. And I think you're going to see it from them once again on Saturday against LSU because they have played down to competition at times this year. But in the games against the best teams they've played, Oregon, Tennessee, and South Carolina, they've also been at their best. And I think you see that on Saturday.
So, Jeff, let me bring you back in on this then. I think before our show began with our live audience here, you picked Georgia to win the national championship. Do you believe that Georgia has a nail-biter game at some point in time over the next three?
I think they've already had it. I think one of the things that's probably not written about or talked about enough is I don't think Georgia's offensive weapons are completely healthy right now. I think that 3 or 4 weeks will do a lot towards getting Georgia back. Remember how Stetson looked, how he closed last year against Alabama last few games, and look how much better he looked when he came out against Michigan. Seemed like a totally different player. I think that's important. I think the nail-biter game to me was that Missouri game. Everybody will look back on that, and folks, you got to remember this.
As we all predicted.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, you ask Kirby Smart who he wouldn't want to play. It's probably Missouri right now.
Because I mean, that one right there were like 5 drives where Georgia absolutely had to score, had to hold serve, or that thing would have gotten away from them. But the thing that just blows my mind, you were talking about this a minute ago. You guys are the sports entertainment wagerer enthusiasts. If you would have taken a parlay in Vegas and you would have said non-playoff parlay, and you would say, give me Alabama, give me Clemson, give me Ohio State, give me all of those teams not to make the college football playoff, I don't even know if the odds could even be counted by your favorite bookie right there, because to me, every year, there's 6 teams that can win the college football playoff, and those are 4 of them right there.
Well, I believe this, if TCU and USC win, this will be the first college football playoff that neither Clemson nor Alabama participate in. So I think that speaks to that level of just parity we've seen this year.
That's a really good point, Connor. How about you, Mike? Do you think there's a nail-biter game at some time for Georgia over the next 3?
I do. It's been the character of this team. There's been some moments. There's been some times. It's kind of been the story of the year, the resilience that we've seen from Georgia. And I think you've got to give these other teams credit. I kind of look at it like the NCAA basketball tournament. This has turned into a tournament sport. And all these teams that make it are all playing very good football. I don't know that we've seen Georgia's best since that Tennessee game. I don't know that we'll see Georgia's best on Saturday. You talk about the health of the players. You know, I'll be transparent here. I'm not sure Stetson Bennett's 100%. I thought he looked outstanding this season. I saw great improvement. But of late, some of the passes have been a little off. You've seen him move his arm. You've seen Kirby go to a much higher run-pass ratio with the run game. I'm with Jeff and Connor here. I think Stetson will be much better in the semifinals, as he did last year, kind of turning it on to what we may see. I'm not so sure about Saturday's game, but whether it's LSU or whether it's USC or TCU or maybe Michigan, and what exactly qualifies as a nail-biter? 10 points these days? I mean, as you said, Georgia blows everybody out.
Yeah.
I thought Georgia Tech was a nail-biter for 1 half. I said, what in the world am I watching here? So by that standard, I think somebody can play Georgia within 10 points, and that qualifies as a nail-biter in today's Georgia football standards.
So let's do this, kind of going around the board here. I'm going to give you my 4. I'm going to give you my result. I believe that Georgia obviously wins on Saturday. I think they win comfortably, but maybe not. You know, if you're going to bring the point spread into play, maybe a little close in the experts thing. But then beyond that, I'll have Georgia USC here in Atlanta. I'll have Michigan TCU in the Fiesta. I believe the national championship is Georgia versus Michigan. I think Georgia wins all 3 of its next 3 games by at least 2 touchdowns.
Georgia, Ohio State, TCU, Michigan, Georgia, Michigan in the title game. Georgia wins.
Are you telling me that Georgia's about to run through a college football playoff against both Ohio State and Michigan?
I do, because I told you today on Go With The Flow, which you can check out on Friday, presented by R.S. Andrews. USC is losing to Utah this weekend.
So, and that's a strong prediction, but
Strong.
let me just pull out, though, and say this for a second. I think one of the coolest things about the Kirby Smart era is not just the success and the winning, but in some respects who it's coming against. We've seen Georgia beat Notre Dame twice. We've seen Georgia beat Oklahoma in a Rose Bowl. I mean, Georgia lost to Texas, but they still played them in a Sugar Bowl. They played Michigan last year in an Orange Bowl. To think you could have 2 more Michigan-Ohio State type games coming up. As a kid, I didn't just root for Georgia to win a national championship and dream about championships. I dreamed about seeing Georgia play those kinds of teams more regularly. That's, to me, been one of the sneaky fun parts of the Kirby Smart era, is you've got these kinds of teams on the schedule now in a regular basis, where very casually Connor just suggested the idea of Michigan, Ohio State, or in the opposite order, Ohio State versus Michigan for an eventual national championship. That's not my prediction, but boy, that's pretty fun to consider.
Yeah.
Connor, let you body and toe tag that prediction right there, okay? Is Georgia still a 2-touchdown winner against both those teams?
2 touchdowns, no. Double digits, yes.
Double digits, huh?
Yeah.
You know, I kind of think that things will kind of hold serve. I know that's not very great and glorious. I think it'll be the same 4 teams right now. I like Georgia's chances, even under a lot of extreme situations in those games. I think the best thing about this Georgia team is they don't really need to. They can win the football game in so many different ways. They can have the hiccup. They can have the slow start. I think Kirby said something in the press conference on Saturday where he's like, "Man, we just keep taking snaps, and it's all going to write itself out." How many times this year has Kirby said, "Well, we know we had the better team. They know we have the better team." I think right now, that blue chip talent ratio, looking at these teams, not only is it the right team and the right pieces and the right pro personnel, but they're so bought in on what Georgia's trying to do. Let's remember, this would be year 1 Brian Kelly. How much culture, chemistry do you have there? Year 1 Lincoln Riley. How much culture, chemistry will you have there, especially with all these transfers coming in? Really, the way it sets up for Georgia, unless Connor Theory blows up and everybody, I think Georgia is just so well prepared for this playoff run.
So, Mike, we'll give you the last word here. Your 4 and how it plays out from there.
Yeah, like I said, I'm convinced that the College Football Playoff Committee is going to find a way to put Michigan and USC together. So I'm going to say Georgia and TCU in Atlanta, and we're going to see Michigan and USC out in the Fiesta Bowl. I think Georgia's going to play USC for the national championship and beat USC.
Boy, that'd be fun in Los Angeles for that. How about go for 2 in 22 right out there in Los Angeles against the hometown team? That could be a lot of fun. Yes, sir.
And you know what you were talking about, those teams, that historic teams Georgia needed to play to check off history. You got to include the Trojans in there as well.
0-3 lifetime. Haven't played since 1960, I don't believe.
I mean, to me, the most unfathomable thing is they would play potentially USC for the first time in forever in Atlanta.
Yeah.
That just makes no sense how those 2 teams would meet in Atlanta.
Yeah, I would love the idea of Georgia beating USC in Atlanta and forcing USC, what fans they have, to watch Georgia in their own town win the national championship. I love the idea.
Here's the question. How many Alabama and Tennessee and Florida fans would turn into USC fans real fast? That's the question.
Those song girl sweaters they'll be trying to put them on. That's probably about right.
Never heard an LA guy with a drawl before. Are you sure you're from Los Angeles, sir?
All right, one final time, let me remind you, our friends at Marlowe's Tavern have a great holiday gift idea for you. When you go to marlowstavern.com or just stop by the tavern right there in your neighborhood, you can enjoy a great opportunity right now to get a $50 gift card, which is a great gift for really anybody on your list right now. And as a special thank you to you on that, you get the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine. We've done this promotion with Marlowe's for so many years, and it's always a lot of fun, and it's always well received, and this year is no different. And in addition to that, when you also get the $100 Marlowe's Tavern gift card, not only do you get the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine, but you also get a bonus $20 gift card, which, if I'm being honest, I would suggest you use that on yourself. So enjoy that. It's our friends at Marlowe's Tavern. And by the way, what a great night tonight with the food and the craft cocktails and all the fun, some special new menu items. A few things I haven't even tried as of yet. So there's so many fun things going on at Marlowe's Tavern. We've got a great crowd here. We're going to get back to interacting with some of them. We wish you could have been here, but maybe we'll see you next time, and we'll certainly see you throughout the rest of the next several weeks as we continue to go for 2 in 22. Thanks to all of our sponsors who make it possible. We'll talk to you again very soon.